This KFAN podcast is sponsored by Builders and Remodelers, exclusive Twin Cities provider of Elements Windows. Get the highest quality windows at unmatchable value. Visit buildersandremodelers.com for more details.
Well, we tend to play the instrumental version of the regular song opening on a day like this for what probably would seem to be fairly obvious reasons. And yet, on the other hand, you can make the argument that, especially on a day like this, the words, the lyrics, the title of the song would so clearly express the way a lot of people feel today, right? How prescient was the late, great Marvin Gaye on a number of fronts? What's going on? Bumper to Bumper is the name of the program. We'll be with you till 6:30 tonight. Barreiro and Guardsy. Lots of stuff planned from a guest standpoint. I'll give you details on that a little later. But obviously the A topic is going to be the A topic probably throughout this show today, and I'm guessing for several days, if not weeks. And I was trying to figure out how to open this thing because there's no really good way on a day like this, I don't think, because of where everybody's minds are. But the word I kept coming back to, especially as we got more details today on the federal and state charges, we heard a pretty chilling summary from the acting U.S. Attorney for Minnesota, Joe Thompson. The word I kept coming back to was vulnerability. How vulnerable stories like this, I think, make us all feel. Now, even to the 10th, maybe 100th power, if you have a position of prominence and authority, especially, one could say, on the political side, right? Vulnerability. How vulnerable anybody must feel on a day like this, that even in our own homes, we like to think that's our castle, relatively safe there, right? Even to a person presenting himself as a police officer. You're asleep in your house, right? One moment. The next, you are fending off an assault or a murder. In this situation, it just feels like locks obviously mean nothing. Time of day means nothing. Reason obviously means nothing. The senselessness of it all, because it is so incredibly senseless, means nothing, at least to the individual responsible for the assassinations. It leaves, I think, everybody feeling, despite security efforts and trying to stay vigilant and all that stuff, incredibly vulnerable. The helplessness of that feeling in those homes, in your safe spots, must have been rather overwhelming. And it's all punctuated by what, according to the complaint, the individual responsible for it all said via text to his wife. How chilling is, Dad went to war last night. What protects you against someone who is thinking like that? Nothing. Nothing can protect you. Now, we can make the argument, as we'll talk about over the course of today's show, that law enforcement itself did provide some protection, perhaps preventing more slaughter that might have taken place involving a couple of other state legislators. And I kept coming back to, look, there's going to be plenty of time. I know we can't wait. I know it was starting an hour after we found out, Saturday night, early Sunday. Or no, I guess it would be Friday night, early Saturday. What this was about, what message was attempting to be delivered, etc. We all knew. Everybody knew in an instant, based on, of course, where our own political sensibilities might lie. But as if there's not enough tragedy in this story, you have the added element here that one of the most compelling political dramas had played out not that long ago in St. Paul, involving who? Melissa Hortman, who basically came to meet reporters on one day holding back tears, not very well, admitting she's basically voting for something that she knows is going to hurt people, but that she felt committed to on the basis of what? Getting a deal done. Reaching some level of consensus, which by definition means what? Accommodating to a certain degree the wishes of the other side of the political aisle. What do we, and I'm not here to, I don't want to get into the debate about the components of the bill. I don't care. It doesn't matter. My point is, what do a lot of people clamor for in the last several years, maybe decade or longer? How many times did, back in the day, we had Joseph Califano on this show? Joe worked in several presidential administrations. He was one of the chief domestic advisors for Lyndon Baines Johnson going back to the 60s. And more recently, we would talk to Joe about, in several administrations, Republican and Democrat, more recent ones, Bush, Obama, etc. And he'd say, you know what would drive LBJ crazy? Nobody talks to one another across the political aisle in any meaningful way, or at least not enough to where you can compromise. Come up with ideas that, at least in principle, might be helpful. Legislation that might be helpful. With some acknowledgement, though, that there's another side out there. How many times did he tell us this? His frustration with several politicians, legislators in that regard. And here we had a woman who was attempting to do exactly that. Now, let me quickly say, it wouldn't matter if she was classified as far left or someone who was trying to make a deal with the other side, more accommodating. Murder and assassination is murder and assassination, period, full stop, end of story. We know that. But the added, for me, tragedy, like I said, is however this individual perceived Melissa Hortman and others on the list. This was an individual who did attempt to acknowledge that the other side existed. And for her good work in that regard, her life is over. Her children are not any longer going to be able to spend time with their mother or father. It's mind-blowing, but it speaks again to vulnerability. And if you have someone who says, Dad went to war last night, there's no defense against that. That's the chilling part. There is no defense with someone who is that wrong-minded, that possessed, that maniacal. Nothing that anybody can do about it. And, you know, we're going to get the usual recriminations is that this is a wake-up call. We got to figure it out. We got to stop talking mean to each other because here's how we feel about rhetoric. I think, this is my view. If people who are endorsing my position get tough, get vicious, get maybe even a little over the top with their rhetoric, they have reason to be that way. Got to get people's attention. This is serious stuff. If the folks on the other end of the political rhetoric, on the other end of the aisle, their people go at it that way, it's dangerous. Be careful. The message you're sending could be in the hands of the wrong person, in the hands of someone like Vance Belter lead to him doing, and we, by the way, don't know if there's any line at all. That's not the point. That's the lectures we get. That's the conversation. We are only concerned about how high the rhetoric level gets raised when it's done by the other side. When it's our side, we think it's too much at stake. Got to play fire with fire. So I'm going to roll my eyes at all the lectures we're going to get about this is the wake-up call. We got to figure this thing out because I think this is going to go on for a while, and then it's going to recede a bit. And then the same rhetoric wars are going to continue with over-the-top conversation and allegations. And we'll be in the same place. We just, unfortunately, are in this pattern. How we get out of it, I don't know. I'd like to think that, everybody wants to think, well, there's a tipping point. This might be it. I mentioned Joe Thompson, the acting U.S. attorney. No exaggeration to say that his crimes are the stuff of nightmares. This was a political assassination, Thompson says, which is a word not a word we use very often here in the United States, let alone here in Minnesota. Chilling attack on our democracy, on our way of life. It's only the most recent example of political extremism in this country, and I hope it's a wake-up for all. That's a wake-up for everyone that people can disagree without being evil. I appreciate his words. I respect them. He's saying precisely what he has to say and should say in this position. I'm not convinced. Sorry, I'm not trying to be the cynic about it, but we're in this pattern. It's a cycle. And so there might be a lowering of the rhetoric for a few days. In the meantime, like I said, everybody's decided exactly what the motivation was here. Everybody's decided who's at fault here. Everybody's decided that, and let's be blunt about this. This is the saddest part for me. If they identify this with the other side of the aisle, they're secretly delighted. Not delighted that anybody was assassinated or murdered. No. It's them. It's them, not us. And we can use this. Until we figure out that game has to stop, then I honestly fear that we're going to continue the pattern. It feels like, some people have likened this to the, and I'm old enough to have lived through the 60s, especially the violent year of 1968, but even before that, JFK in 1963. I understand some of those concerns, and maybe we are on the brink of that. People forget how tumultuous that was, even much more so than it is today. But what I think the greater concern is, in a culture like this, no matter what people say at a time like this, does it become, as each of these things happen? How long ago was there an attempt on Trump's life? When was that? Last summer.
Yeah.
The more of these we have, I fear what I think some people fear is it's becoming, quote unquote, normalized. It's becoming easier and easier for the next guy to say, hey, what they did. Why not? Some people just want to see the world burn. It's from a motion picture that many of you know. So those are my opening thoughts here on just a horrendous occasion all over the country, obviously, but especially here in the Twin Cities. We find ourselves again. It's uncanny, is it not? We are, with the notable exception of what's going on in the Middle East, we are the center of domestic discourse in the United States of America, just like we were, how many years ago? 2020. Are we not? We're ground zero. And people saying, what the hell's going on in Minnesota? What the hell's happening there? One of our guests who's going to help us try to answer that question and give us, I think, some good insight from a law enforcement standpoint is former St. Cloud Police Chief Blair Anderson, who is no longer working but found himself, because of where he lives, inside the original perimeter And so he'll give us a bird's eye view of what Friday night into Saturday morning in this entire weekend were like from his standpoint, what he has observed regarding law enforcement and how this story played out. In addition, Paul Bloom is going to join at, was it 4:02?
Yes.
And Bloom has been basically on the story all weekend as well. So we'll get the very latest news from him. Johnny Athletic is going to join in the 5 o'clock hour. In fact, he's coming into studio. I'm sure we'll do a little bit of toy department stuff, but we'll probably do some of this as well. And we may even add some guests depending on who we find and what we think might be useful at a time like this. Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line is open at 64686. We'll leave it at that and try to get caught up in just a minute here in the The other thing that hits me is that I've had a recurring theme on this show for a number of years that politics always had a measure of theater to it, a measure of performance to it. You could even argue it is part of good politics. But I believe one of the changes is that the percentage that is performance has gone up over the decades to where I think a lot of times it feels like well over maybe 75 to 80% of politics is performance in 2025. That really has nothing to do with legislating. It has nothing to do with thinking great thoughts. It's just, I'm out here to perform, and we're all encouraged by that. Why? Via the internet. I debated whether to even bring this up, but I'm going to. I'm sure many of you have seen it, and there's a part of me that says, in an odd sort of way, you're better off not clicking on it. But then I think, given the individual as a United States senator, you say, well, how can you just let that go? Mike Lee, United States senator, sends out a tweet that's gotten a lot of attention. I think he tweeted it out yesterday. And there's twin photos of the perpetrator, one standing in front of the door. I think this would be the Hoffman house. That's on the left. This was from one of those ring cam deals. And then on the right, it's just more of a standard photo of said individual smiling. And a U.S. senator tweeted, "Nightmare on Waltz Street." Get it? So not only am I going to mock an assassination, I'm going to do the double whammy of, I'm a righty, I'm supposed to make fun of Walz's name, right? That's the new bit. We've talked about this. We're going to call him Waltz instead of Walz as further sign of disrespect. Now tell me that's not a person who can be taken seriously, or better yet, wants to be taken seriously, right? That's just somebody performing. Got the X account, knows they're going to get the reaction that he is getting, and doesn't care because it's all farce now. It's all performance. In all seriousness, how do you, I don't care how in other ways serious, what kind of gravitas people think you might have. How are you taken seriously after you do that at a time like this? Oh, I see. Because the individuals who were killed are Democrats, I guess. There's no chance, no matter who is in power in a given state, that this individual would send the same thing out, right? If they were Republican legislators, there's no chance that indeed would take place. And of course, we had the usual million conspiracy theories from the start that this is a closeted Democrat, right, who he actually was, one of the theories was he was trying to punish Melissa Hortman for the vote that had her in hot water within her own party, right, from many of her colleagues in St. Paul, Minnesota. So there was a lot of that as well. So to me, all the, like I said, grand proclamations of enough, tipping point, I don't know, unless you got to convince me that no matter how I feel politically about somebody, there's something that's going to restrain me at that moment, given the level of devastation and suffering, from trying to do a gotcha about a governor that I have identified as the enemy. That's the enemy, right? If you don't have that internal clock, then you don't care about doing anything but performing. It's as simple as that. And that, I'm sure there have been other examples, but they have come from people who you say, well, it's not an elected, not elected representative or elected senator, whatever the case may be. And you go, everybody's got an opinion. As Denny said, everybody's entitled to one, right? So there you have it. 64686. I got 1 million texts already, and they fall along the same lines. Yep. You're ripping one side more than you should, and the other side got nothing to do with this. You sure we're not this passionate after the Trump assassination attempt, which I've already named twice, I think, during the show, as being part of the same issue, but he conveniently forgot that. Dan, you forgot to mention that Mike Lee is right-wing Republican. Didn't I just say he was a Republican? If I didn't, I just said Walz is on the other side. We get it. Not sure. So I'd had hopes actually to get the chief in, but he's got some stuff he's got to do in the afternoon. So we're going to get him in sometime soon. That's kind of overdue. But we're going to chat with him by telephone. As I said, then Bloom with the latest on the new, covering the news this weekend. That'll be at 4:02, you said? Mm-hmm. On a very busy afternoon for him. And Johnny, and maybe some more before this program is done. We got a minute here too. I can squeeze it a little bit. Anything as you were waking up to this thing? I'm trying to figure even out how I came to know what was going on. I don't even remember. It was obviously online. Yep. I don't remember exactly it, but then once it started, it was like it went from unnamed legislators to here's where we're going, and then you're very quickly, and oh my God.
That's it. It's just the whole thing is horrifying, and it's exhausting in a way because of the stuff that you just laid out all weekend, where I basically left the weekend of going, just because you have Twitter doesn't mean you need to tweet. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's fair.
And on any of these horrifying tragedies, because the stuff I was seeing online was so frustrating, was so out of bounds. The Mike Lee thing is getting a lot of headlines, but we're still seeing, just tweeting things before we even know anything. We didn't even really know a lot until about 1:30 this afternoon, right? Or I guess a little earlier this morning when they did the federal press conference.
Correct.
There was so much that we didn't know. And it just becomes a game of trying to follow the story, get the right information, make sure the right people are in the right places, but then also just watching all the different rabbit holes. Us at our worst.
It's very true.
Us at our worst at times.
But who's been, I think, has been good? The people who've walked in official positions to the microphones, I think, have been very good, because I think they have not been, a lot of times they could, in a situation like this, you can A, be overwhelmed. B, you can be very defensive about everything. You can be very reticent. And I think the folks in positions of authority, Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, a number of spots, FBI, etc., I think they've been pretty good. Mm-hmm. And you know what else, where they've been good, to your point, is we're not there yet.
Right.
We got this, we're putting this, we're trying to connect this dot, but we're not. We know what people, I guess, are waiting for. We're going to give you facts as we can, and then as we get more information, we're not going to pretend he had a manifesto. because it wasn't a manifesto. It's what we were told today.
Right.
It was a list of names. They're all Democrats. That's undeniable.
Mm-hmm.
But
in various sheets of paper from various times.
Yes.
It wasn't like a list with a ranking and here's what we're doing. It was a bunch of different sheets kind of scrambled all over the place.
And I just appreciated that it's like everybody wants their red meat. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with the questions. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the questions, but I'm saying I think they've done a good job of saying we'll follow the story. And how many times have I said it? There's going to be plenty of time to get to whatever we think, where we think this story, once the full story is out, to cast blame and to say it's about this and it's about that. Let's find out a little. Let's have the story fleshed out for more than 15 minutes. But that's not the way it works on X for sure. Let's come back. Oh, by the way, I'll finish this segment with a text that came in from Bill Owatonna. As a police officer, I will sometimes knock on someone's door at 2:30 a.m. to let them know their garage door is open. I will have to find a different way to get a hold of them now. So true. Everybody, I think, will be left rethinking the very simple thing of a police officer at the door. Something might be up. And now what have we been basically trained to think? Call 911.
The Brooklyn Park officer said as much today.
They will then be able to get that call through dispatch to confirm whether or not there is a police officer at your door.
How sick is that?
It's unbelievable. Back with, a guy who knows law enforcement well and found himself inside the original perimeter, the former St. Cloud police chief. I just call him Chief. He is next here in the... Has appeared on this program many, many times over the years, former St. Cloud police chief with all kinds of metro area law enforcement experience as well. And he's kind enough to join us this afternoon via the Connecticut Water Systems hotline. Chief, thanks for the time, as always. I guess we start with when you first became aware in your home that something was up in your area.
Can you hear me okay, Dan?
Loud and clear.
I always have to check here.
Yeah, we got you.
5:30 Saturday morning. We thought it was an Amber Alert, and my wife gave me the nudge, and I looked at the alert on the phone here, and with my trammeled vision, Dan, and I don't mean to be flipped, I was like, oh my God. And then it all came clear that, okay, we are in the perimeter because that neighborhood is not even 2 miles from our home. And so I immediately was on hyper alert and got up, and I'm being honest, Dan, I'm not a gun nut, but I moved the firearms I do have in my home to every level because I didn't want to be anywhere in my home. And this suspect showed up, obviously would be uninvited. And I started to just kind of do some foot patrol work on my own property and just around the neighborhood, to see if I could see anything and be helpful. You know, the old see something, say something. And, Dan, unnerving is an understatement. Not just for me, certainly for everybody that was in that perimeter and the shelter in place perimeter, but for the whole state, the whole region, the whole country, man, until they caught this guy.
For you, as someone who, has been in law enforcement or were in law enforcement for a long time, seen a lot of tragedies, seen a lot of very difficult stories play out. How did, as it became clear what this story was about and how widespread the violence was going to be, how did you process it? What were you thinking about? What are you still thinking about?
Dan, it was sickening. It was frustrating. I was angry, like most rational people were, and I had to ask for forgiveness for the things that I was thinking about what would happen to him when he was confronted by law enforcement. I've had the pleasure of having some dialogue with Representative Hortman back during the George Floyd things. And what I can tell you is, and this is not cliche, is that she was reasonable. You could talk to her and you could find common ground, which you've pointed out earlier about her tear-filled message just a week ago or however long it was ago, when they came to some consensus when she voted on something that she didn't necessarily want to or believe in, but because it was for the common good. And that's the person that I dealt with. So it was sickening, and it was scary, Dan. I'm not afraid to say that. It was scary, and I'm wondering, where the hell are we that this is what we resort to? And ironic that my wife made a really salient point to me through her frustration as well. And it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on or where your ideology is. And she said something to me that resonates still. She goes, so we're supposed to believe that this person who allegedly did all this stuff is so anti-abortion, given the ideology that that's taking the life of a human being, but has no compunction about taking the lives of other people who disagree. And I think that's the quandary that we are in and will remain in.
From what strikes you regarding the law enforcement component of this story? Because I think, like a lot of people, we got more and more of the story fleshed out regarding the effort to bring law enforcement to the Hortman home when no one had been called to that home. And we've learned today, of course, that there were 4 stops that this individual made with, obviously, one would assume, the same intention in all 4 stops. What stands out to you in terms of the law enforcement standpoint, particularly, like you said, sort of just the willingness to because I don't think there's any assignment to go, but it was a police officer or maybe even a supervisor working on a hunch, just saying, hey, let's be sure before I wrap up my particular night, let's send some people to that location and see what's going on, if there might be anything.
Two things come to mind, Dan, right away. Number one is that that's what we do, and I couldn't be more proud of the entire law enforcement apparatus that was dispatched that did not rest until they found this guy. But yeah, Dan, a whole lot of crimes have been solved based on a hunch because a police officer, he or she, said, something's not right. Or, you know what, I have this intel stored in the back of my mind, and so let me just go give a check. And in this case, clearly, it turned out to be, sadly enough, valid, but obviously helpful in capturing this person. The other thing that comes to mind is that, Dan, of all the ground that we have made, and we have made some since 2020, and I don't have to tell anybody what that means. We all know what that means, that we have been pushed back significantly because now someone who was impersonating a police officer, taking advantage of the trust that we have been working to restore for 5 years and for centuries to build, took advantage of that. And so now people are going to be even more reticent. Hell, Dan, I was. We had a power outage early Sunday morning before they confronted this guy, and this will make sense to you if you bear with me. And the power kicked back on and my doorbell rang. And so, of course, I went to the door, and they had already put out the warning that don't answer the door unless there's at least 2 police officers, right? And so I went to the door with a firearm in my hand, and I can't see out my front door because the glass is frosted. So I looked out the side window. There was no one there. And for 2 seconds, I thought, well, maybe FedEx delivered a package or Amazon because they'll ring the doorbell when they deliver a package. And then quickly that was dispelled. And I opened my door tactically with my firearm pointed out the door. And what it was when the power came back on, we've got one of those plug-in electric doorbells, and it went off. And I looked at my wife and I was like, okay, this is way unnerving. We cannot live like this. I'm prepared to, but I would rather not.
Yeah.
So that answers your question.
Yeah. And you're a trained, former police officer and police chief. So imagine, the average rube who has no real, connection to any of this sort of stuff. And you were unnerved, imagine, like I said, the average person. That's I think the way a lot of people felt probably throughout the area. It's not like this guy was going to be able to be everywhere, but I think it had everybody sort of looking over their shoulder, especially when it seemed as if he broke out of the original perimeter, right, that had been set up in hopes of trying to sort of trap him there, correct?
Correct, Dan. And I've been going over this since it happened. How did he get from, and now we know that he made a couple of other stops in between. How did he get from Representative Hortman's house to Minneapolis? Because obviously he abandoned the squad there. So did somebody help him? Was there another car? Did he steal a car? And I'm sure they will ferret through and figure out all those things. But those are the kinds of things that go through my mind. Like, okay, at 6:00, his roommate, childhood friend, said he thought he was there. We don't have any confirmation that he was at that time or not. But how did he get there? At some point, he found his way there. So how did he get there?
Good question.
And who may have helped him? Did he walk? I mean, all of these things, man, go through your mind. And I can tell you, I did not sleep or rest well, just like all of us, until last evening when we had confirmation that they had this person in custody.
Let me get your help on a couple of law enforcement protocol questions, because now that we've got the complaint, it's pretty specific in laying out the sequence of where the perpetrator went and in what order. So he goes to Maple Grove, to the home of another state legislator. And by the way, one or two of these, I think, have named themselves. We'll get into that later, self-identified, because at the press conference there was a desire to, it's up to those legislators if they want to identify themselves. And in this case, the legislator was out of town with her family. So from there, they're another, miracle, just by the grace of the fact that they're not home. They're on vacation. They live. He then goes, this is where it gets interesting to me. He travels to New Hope, to the home of another elected rep, and apparently at this point, by the way, law enforcement has been alerted that there could be threats on state politicians. So police are now doing proactive investigations. They've widened it out. So a New Hope officer is dispatched to the home, comes upon an SUV that resembles a squad car. And according to the complaint, the officer approached the SUV, saw a, quote, bald white male staring straight ahead. The officer tried to speak with that man, but he continued staring straight ahead and did not respond. And, quote, the officer then left to continue the wellness check. And once the officer returned to that earlier area where the SUV was parked, it was gone. So what's procedure there? Because, on the outside as a layman, I'm going, well, if the person's not responding to you at all, would that not give you pause? Not necessarily that it's a bad guy, but that something weird is going on here. So what's protocol in a situation like that, if there is one?
Well, Dan, the honest answer is that it depends. And because I wasn't there, and if that was the person that officer confronted, I don't want to disparage that person, because, you have to keep in mind, too, that we are always cognizant, no matter what the public might think or feel when a certain incident happens, of people's rights. And if there's no reason for us to detain someone, we're not going to, because that could be you, right? That could be anybody. And so that's the best answer I have for you on that particular part. But to your point, by the grace of God, nobody else got hurt.
Yes.
Because one family was out of town. But again, all of these later contribute to law enforcement being able to capture this person, because it's all intel at that point. And you have to remember, this is fluid, right? And,
Yes.
and so everybody doesn't know everything that's going on at any given moment when you have a situation like this. So I'm going to give, and I'm not suggesting that you weren't. I'm
Right.
going to give that officer some grace. I mean,
Who knows?
perhaps
Yeah.
it wasn't. Perhaps it wasn't this person. Perhaps it was, but we don't know, and we never will. But it's just a sad, Dan. I mean, it is just so sad and unnerving that this is how people want to resolve their differences because they disagree ideologically. And I don't know, Dan, you and I grew up in the same era, and we have a lot of similarities, and we don't always agree on everything. But this kind of nonsense right here, it just leaves you scratching your head. I mean, that's the best I got for you, man. I'm sorry.
When you
I don't have more for that.
Well, when you're in law enforcement, as you were for so many years, I have to believe, you guys are willing to serve. You're willing to go towards the violence, right? That's the job that the rest of us, frankly, are not capable of doing. And yet, I got to believe, when you hear what we've now heard, that the perpetrator in this case sends out a text to his wife, "Dad went to war last night." You don't want any part of that either, right? I mean, that's got to be the worst nightmare for anybody in law enforcement, because that's somebody, Chief, I have to tell you, who's very certain about what they're doing, and they're committed to doing it.
I would agree with everything you said, except for this. And I'll be honest with you, Dan. Yeah, we want every part of it. The professional part
Right.
of us. As human beings or as people, yeah, no, we'd rather not have any part of that. But as professionals and those of us who have sworn to make sure that the rest of you are safe when you're sleeping, bring it. Bring it on. And whatever happens. If we have to make the ultimate sacrifice so that you are safe, that is what we will do. But clearly, we would rather not have to confront people who are unhinged, as this person allegedly, the alleged suspect, because nothing's been proven yet, was. And so, no, man, that we sign up for that, Dan. We didn't get drafted. And we can step away anytime. But, yeah, man, we're going to step into the breach for you. And I'm so proud of all the people. Because think about this, Dan, that whole search, we're talking about an area that stretches from Hennepin County to Sibley County.
Right.
Rural areas all in between. You have no idea what or where you're going to find. You just don't, but that's okay. We do it willingly, and that's the point that we try and make to people, is that this is what we do, and they did it, man. And I'm so proud of them, man, because nobody. If you think we weren't resting, they certainly weren't resting until they got this guy in handcuffs, and I'm proud of them for doing it.
As I understand it, we've been told, when they surrounded him, he was armed, still armed at that point, but they obviously convinced him to end it, to just put down, obviously to surrender. How tricky is that equation?
Very, very, because here's the news. We're reactive at that point. At the point that we confront this person, this alleged suspect, we're reactive. And so you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's an old saying, Dan, first day of law enforcement school, let me see your hands. Hands kill. Nothing else does. And if it's dark and you're in a wooded area and you can't see that person's hands, I'm telling you, Dan, I would not have been shocked if they would have put some ammunition downrange. But again, you don't know who you're confronting, and so that's the tricky part, right? And so when you're in a rural area like that, like one of the neighbors said, he heard some gunshots at 2 a.m., but, his neighbor often target practices. could have been that person. And I don't mean to keep introducing, more and more variables, but these are all the things that are going through your mind when you're confronted or when you're in this situation. And so you do want to resolve it as best you can, but you just don't know, Dan. That's why sometimes my answer is it depends, man, because there's no blueprint for this. He obviously did not want to confront law enforcement, which says a whole lot more about him, which I won't get into.
Right.
And you know what I mean. But they got him, and that's the best news for the rest of us, but it's not going to bring back the Hortmans, and it's not going to salve the wounds for their family. And my heart and prayers go out to them as well as the Hoffmans. Because think about this, Dan, this is how my mind works. Their 20-year-old daughter who witnessed that mess in her home is going to be traumatized for the rest of her life. And those are things that we have to consider as well.
100%.
The rest of her life.
Yeah.
She survived, and so did the Hoffmans, but they're going to be traumatized by this for the rest of their lives. To your point earlier, Dan, my goodness, you can't be safe enough to fall asleep in your own home without some unhinged person coming in and trying to assassinate you. Yeah, man. I mean, there's just nothing good from this, which is obvious. I don't mean to be Captain Obvious, Dan, but there's nothing good.
One last item. Let me ask you one last thing here. So you have, you are a Detroit kid who's made Minnesota your home, and been here a long time now. So we find ourselves again, for the second time in not that long a period of time, going obviously back to George Floyd, sort of the center of attention, domestically speaking, in the United States of America, one could say for all the wrong reasons. And I'm not here to say that means we're all responsible, but what I mean is how, even though you're a transplant, I think Minnesota means a lot to you. I mean, you worked here. This is a place where, you had a terrific career in law enforcement. How wounding is it for us to be, reacting to another trauma, so to speak, like this?
Unspeakably, Dan, and that's a great question, and thank you for asking that, because what it makes me feel like is that, I came from a very, very rough town, and I came from the worst neighborhood in the roughest city in America at the time. It's not about me. But what it reminds me of is that for as long as I've lived here, I still hear people saying those kinds of things don't happen here. And I want to pull my hair out because obviously the obvious answer is yes, they do. And they have. And so perhaps we need to stop thinking that we are insulated from this kind of madness, whatever the impetus is, just because we're here. We're in Minnesota and Minnesota nice. We're in the Midwest. No, things happen wherever there are people. And that's not an indictment against all of Minnesotans, because clearly all of Minnesotans don't feel that way, and they certainly don't act upon it if they do. But it is troubling, and I agree with you. Once again, here within 5 years, we are at the epicenter. We are headline on CNN right now. And, we laugh and joke that, this is flyover country, right? When you're in the toy department or when we're talking about other things, nobody cares about what's happening in Minnesota because we're flyover country. And we like that. I certainly do. But this kind of madness, it happens here. And if I can leave people with one message is that please stop saying that these kinds of things don't happen here, because we've proven twice in 5 years that they do. And so let's just be cognizant of that, and perhaps we can get a handle on it if we at least recognize that it's plausible and it's possible that it can happen here. If that makes any sense to you.
I was going to say, very well said. I'm glad we got to that part of the story, and we appreciate, as always, the time. We will get you in studio here sometime soon when it works for your schedule. And hopefully get to some happier discussion as well. But sometimes we got to talk about the grim stuff, and I appreciate that you're willing to do so as always. Thank you, Chief.
Absolutely. Thank you, my friend. Thank you for having me on. I'm just so sorry that it had to be under these circumstances, but it's always a privilege and a pleasure to visit with you and share what I know, or at least what I think I know. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate you. That is Blair Anderson, former St. Cloud police chief, who has joined us for a number of years on a number of often pretty serious subjects, sometimes lighter, like when we get him out at the State Fair, it can be lighter. Let's come back and check in with the guy who's been covering the news on the ground all weekend. Fox 9's Paul Bloom with the very latest is